I've been a PC gamer for years now. Obviously, I was aware of most of legendary console titles and even played most of them at my friends' houses, but I've never owned a console of my own. Now, all of that has changed when I became a fan of a certain title called Gears of War. We played through its campaign and didn't rest until we finished it on the hardest difficulty. I eventually got hooked on Gears multiplayer and got to a point where I knew all the best Gears MP players on Windows by name. It was a great time. Then Gears 2 was announced, and it was really hard not to get hyped. And then Cliffy said it would be an Xbox exclusive. That was it for me. I couldn't miss the sequel to one of my favorite games ever. I had to get myself an Xbox. And that I did. Little did I know what floodgates had I opened. To avoid my first console just sitting there until Gears 2 release, I decided to get a couple of games to introduce myself to the exciting new world. It was so easy because I'd just gotten myself into the best generation of consoles to date. I was also lucky with my random choice. I bought Ninja Gaiden 2 and yes, Forza Motorsport 2. To say that I was pleasantly surprised would be the understatement of the year. I was enthralled. I was a huge racing game fan. Need for Speed, NASCAR racing, hell, I'm ancient enough to remember Test Drive and El Anza racing. I like karting and driving fast on a track in real life too, but I'm not that into serious racing games like iRacing because it requires a very serious investment into gear. It becomes more of a job at that point. So I stuck to more casual games like Forza. It becomes less Sunday drive and more divorced dad builds cockpit instead of talking to his kids. Although I'm not ruling out doing this in the future. What was immediately apparent is that it was a labor of love by some really talented enthusiasts. In fact, by the release of Forza 3 it became something more than just a racing game. It became an actual system seller. At that point I no longer cared about the next Gears as much as I was hyped for Forza 4. It became my go-to when it came to racing games. I even won a photo contest on the Turn 10 forums. You could say I became an Xbot. That time is long past, but my attachment to Forza is still alive. Unfortunately, it looks like it's time to say goodbye. How did we get here? Of course I've played Gran Turismo and was incredibly hyped for Project Cars and even bought myself a G25 racing wheel. But more on that later. For now, it was exclusively Forza and its unmatched car roster. At the time, Microsoft was run by people who cared about the Xbox brand and its IPs. They managed to add basically conflicting manufacturers in their game. Porsche, Ferrari, and to the lesser extent Mercedes-Benz are notorious for being difficult to get a license from. That's why cars like Roof were serving as stand-ins in so many games for years. Remember how you couldn't run from cops if you were in a Mercedes in Need for Speed? Yeah. But license difficulties aside, the cars themselves were a feast for the eyes. It was well understood by the amazing people at Turn 10 that people who are obsessed with cars like to admire them. That's why a lot of car fans buy scale models, just to be able to inspect all the curves and lines of the body and just feel the arousal. Get your mind out of the gutter, guys. This is serious. It's not a fetish unless you start naming your Hot Wheels and auto arts. But sure. A huge part of being a gearhead is to appreciate the work the designers put into making a certain car look aggressive or sexy or both. Turn 10 took this obsession to another level. They created Forza Vista. Some hypercars are as rare as hen's teeth. Most people will never be able to see them in real life, but now they had the ability to drool over them for as long as they pleased. Of course, not every model was perfect or detailed enough in some cases, but it was something that was never been done before. And for the most part, it was glorious. It took our hobby to another level. Finally, a socially acceptable way to oogle at curves for hours without your girlfriend saying, who's this McLaren and why is she texting you? They even went as far as putting a cherry on top and invited Jeremy Clarkson of Top Gear to share his thoughts on the cars you were admiring.
In spirit, the McLaren is closer to a Caterham than a Bugatti. A Caterham with a gold-plated engine compartment.
Car passion at its finest. But of course, the main aspect has always been racing itself, and for the longest time Gran Turismo games were the gold standard. Rightly so, I must add. Polyphony is an absolute legend of a racing game developer. They pioneered so much, and their contribution to the genre is just immeasurable. They actually were the inspiration to the guys at Turn 10. I would be remiss if I didn't mention a few missteps they made. A few of their installments were involved in a number of controversies, and a few GT games will not go down in history as worthy of the name. But as of late, they've been cooking almost non-stop. That also applied to Forza for a while. The competition they brought to the genre was such an immense gust of wind in its sails that we as racing game fans were really eating good. The PC crowd was so jealous. We used to be on top of the world with Porsche Unleashed, Colin McRae Rally and F1 sims and GT sims and what have you, but at the time, the PC world was really missing that passionate developer who would balance gameplay, tracks and cars as perfectly as Turn 10 did it. PC gamers were like divorcees on Christmas, all the gear and nowhere to apply it. Of course there were fantastic sims on PC back then, but they lacked that magic of visual luster that would entice desire. The thing that put Forza Motorsport 2 on the pedestal for me personally is the inclusion of the Nürburgring. This track needs no introduction, it's pure perfection, it's magical. There's so much to it that I would be perfectly content with playing a game where the only featured track would be the Nordschleife. Now I realize this obsession of mine is probably not shared by every racing game fan, but as I said above, the tracks, not only Nürburgring, are just as important as the handling simulation and the cars themselves. Speaking of handling, it's here where the car porn was held up so perfectly. It was the perfect balance between arcadey, forgiving fun and simish realism. They say Forza struck a balance. It's like if iRacing is a physics professor and Need for Speed is a crackhead, Forza is your cool substitute teacher who vapes in the parking lot. What Turn 10 managed to capture best is that heavy cars felt heavy, and the difference between front-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive and all-wheel drive cars was immediately obvious. And above all else, it was fun. It wasn't especially realistic, but it conveyed the feeling of driving a car with a controller better than ever before. I just couldn't get enough. But the revolution did not stop here. The livery design environment turned out to be such a powerhouse that people started coming up with absolute art pieces. Letting you design your own livery is letting for "we trust you not to draw anime tits on a Ferrari." Some of them really took it to the next level. Forget car porn, you could study these artworks for just as long. The amount of effort that went into them was just jaw-dropping. I hope these guys stay in the gaming industry, otherwise it's our loss. The sound was not forgotten. This is the integral part of a driving experience. The rumble of a cross-plane V8, the scream of a V12, the roar of a racing engine, it was all there. And with each new game it was made even better. I remember cranking the volume up to a point I was at risk of having a talk to my neighbors, and letting an AMG Merc just idle for minutes, absorbing the soft rolling sound of a large V8 engine getting ready to shred the tires at any moment. I remember just revving the insane BMW V12 of the McLaren F1 over and over, and then just running it back and forth on a straight just to go through the gears and feel the hairs on my neck rise, listening to the angry, savage roar of that masterpiece of a power plant. Yeah, those were the days. Perhaps one of the reasons racing games are so popular is that cars are fun. And it's even more fun to play around with them like a kid. What could be better than to genuinely experience that childlike awe once again? Because it's hard to get excited about anything when you're a jaded adult, and this was a part of that lost careless freedom. You could cause horrible crashes without any harm, you could slowly learn tracks and become faster and faster until even the hardest AI opponents couldn't hold you back for more than a lap or two. Some people only go for the ultimate challenge, other people. When it comes to Forza, I think this was one of the stepping stones to its 100-meter plunge face first into concrete. People were used to Forza being exemplary and innovative, but online racing is a very tricky beast to tackle. To do it gracefully, one must put his or her best foot forward. Well, I'd say a spare wooden pirate leg was lazily shoved in some direction. Forza's online community is infamous, and to this day it baffles me how a team who managed to build a thriving photo and livery community with such grace could fail the online racing part of it so horribly. We can watch hours upon hours of embarrassing, unsporting and outright troll behavior of people playing Forza online. I mean, somehow even Project Cars was less of a shit show. And I'm talking from personal experience here. Learning the track, playing around with setups, watching tutorials on them and then finally getting it to fit your style and produce lap times that seem outlandish even to yourself sounds incredible to so many of us. I spent 6 hours tuning my suspension and then 6 seconds on the track. Incredible realism. Qualifying to be within hundreds of actual experienced racing drivers is a feeling that is hard to compare to anything else. But then the race starts. I don't think I need to expand on what's been talked to death. Forza racing lobbies are the cream of the crop when it comes to nightmare fuel. Not only is it not fun, it's scarring. It makes you shudder whenever you see a Forza box. Ugh. Now, Assetto Corsa shook the sim industry. It was the racing game that took realism a little bit more seriously and was less niche and paywall than iRacing. The modding community started getting insanely creative and made the wildest of gearhead dreams possible. It felt less corporate and a lot more real, because it was yours to tinker with. And it was a lot more realistic than your GTs and Forzas, and Project Cars. Well, that's where the wedge came. Horizon has become the ultimate playground. Go off-road, jump 800 meters with your 2.5 million Koenigsegg, drown it in the river, and do it all over again. So now that the arcade king is crowned, where does it leave Forza? It needs to put on the grown-up serious sim head, right? Wrong. You figured out the formula already. Those who are after the sim experience are already grinding away in iRacing and to the lesser extent Competizione. They aren't interested in your toy. Those who want to play toy cars and blast through city streets at 200 miles per hour are already playing Horizon. But some of us just want the casual sim-like racing experience. We don't want it to be realistic to a fault. Forget racing wheels, those things are catered to already. Focus entirely on controllers, hell, maybe even try capitalizing on the DualSense haptic and make those triggers feel like pedals more. Go for the feel, the excitement, not realism. We still want to go around the Nürburgring without putting on gloves after spending a used car's worth on a sim rig. But I guess that thing they figured out at Turn 10 years ago is now a thing of the past. Maybe the community is to blame. They nerded out about realism, picked apart the braking and the weight distribution mechanics, pointing out how unrealistic it was, and demanded something better. But the problem here is that the consumer thinks he understands how everything should be without ever trying to make a racing game on their own. Every studio steps on the path of losing their magic touch when they start listening to the vocal minority on the forums. Just stick to your guns, believe in your concept and it'll work. Doesn't need to be perfect, just needs to be fun. Forza Motorsport 7 will be the last Forza Motorsport ever. And it's a sad chapter to close up shop on. But it tried to be the jack of all trades and ended up being indeed the master of none. It overpromised horribly to be built from the ground up when it clearly isn't. All the problems of previous installments that were met unfavorably by the fans are still there. Not only that, new ones were introduced. The colors feel drab. Maybe it's supposed to be realistic that way? So why is the imaginary track that the game is trying to sell itself on so wet, flashy and unrealistically colorful then? It's hard to believe that these two come from the same game. It's all over the place, and this is a perfect representation of what Forza Motorsport feels like these days. Not only is it not built from the ground up, it was shipped undercooked. So many features were missing at release, some are still missing to this day. The admittedly amazing tracks that were added to the game way later were too little too late. The core feature of every Forza Motorsport, the solo career, is absolutely terrible here. It's probably one of the worst ever. Above all else, it shows complete lack of passion for the hobby we're all supposed to be excited about. Maybe it was time to close up shop. Back in Forza Motorsport 2, I was surprised to discover that a lot of the music was very much to my liking. Even better, I was introduced to a few tracks and artists I listen to this day. Old Forza games had amazing soundtracks, nowadays not so much. It's very representative of the state of the franchise itself. They tried to cater to the wheel users but didn't do it properly, and the controller people suffered in the process. The experience became way too twitchy and sensitive for this type of input. Cars feel nervous. Remember when Dan Greenwald came up on stage to introduce the new Forza Motorsport and at the same time revealed the latest Widowmaker, the GT2 RS? The car that doesn't comply with any racing series and yet is still called a GT? But I digress. At the same time, for all its problems, Forza was still considered to be the leader of the racing games. And it was to some extent a system seller. Some of my friends who are not that big into racing games still bought Xboxes just to play Forza on them. And now look where we are. I can't end this video on such a sour note though. Forza Motorsport, especially the fourth, brought us so many hours of enjoyment. Probably the most fun I had playing an arcade racing scene was in that game. It was amazing to be able to study an F40 in detail and compare it to actual photos of it with its Forza counterpart and be amazed how close they were. It was just gaming bliss. Horizon will still be there. I expect the 6th installment to be announced pretty soon. And it's great. Us, fans of motorsport in a more casual fashion, are unfortunately hung out to dry. I'll still be rounding the Nordschleife and Fujimi Kaido every now and then in a GT3 because it's my happy place. But now, every lap will feel like a eulogy. And at the same time, the salute to the good old days. To the people of Turn 10 and the community who helped in creating something truly special. And it'll still be fun. Thank you, Turn 10. Thank you so much for all the love, the enthusiasm, the passion and labor that you put in this hobby we all love so much. I'll be forever grateful for all the fun and enjoyment I had over the years. Thanks to you. I mean it when I say this, you've achieved greatness. If the execs at Microsoft are dumb enough to close the company that helped them establish Xbox, then I'll make a prediction right now. Their whole gaming division is doomed. You've created something truly special, something exceptional, something larger than life. Too bad all good things must come to an end. It was great while it lasted.